So what if I told you that a microscopic temperature shift in your brain, like we're talking just zero point 0.8 degrees, could fundamentally change the entire ecosystem of bacteria living on your skin?
Oh, it's wild. And, today we're looking at a biological phenomenon that leaves, I mean, literally millions of women feeling like their trusty deodorant of 20 years has just, well, suddenly stopped working.
Right. You apply it in the morning, and by lunch, you're looking around wondering, is that me?
Exactly. It creates this immediate, visceral sense of panic. We're talking about a jarring shift that feels completely out of your control.
Yeah.
And for so many people, it carries this really unfair burden of embarrassment, mostly because the underlying mechanics are just rarely explained.
Yeah, which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to this deep dive. And our mission today is to unpack exactly why menopause causes spontaneous sweating, even when you don't feel a full, hot flush, and, the precise biological reasons your body odor might suddenly smell completely different.
It's such an important topic.
It really is, and we are pulling from an incredible stack of sources for this. We've got the latest NICE guidelines on menopause, some really dense, deep dive medical articles on vasomotor symptoms, and some truly fascinating clinical research focusing on sweat gland physiology and the skin's microbiome.
And I think the most crucial takeaway we found across all these sources is that
Hmm?
if you are experiencing this, it requires a biological explanation, not, a better bar of soap.
Right, right.
You're dealing with complex neurobiology here and shifting microscopic ecosystems.
Okay, let's unpack this because before we can even touch on the smell, we kind of have to understand the sweat, right?
Absolutely.
And reading through these medical articles, the standout detail for me is that a lot of women report this sudden, intense sweating happening without even feeling that classic red-faced wave of heat, the traditional hot flush.
Yeah, that catches so many people off guard.
So to figure out why the body suddenly starts producing so much moisture out of nowhere, we have to look at the brain's internal thermostat, which is the hypothalamus. Could you break that down for us?
Sure. So the hypothalamus is fascinating because it operates within what clinical researchers call the thermoneutral zone,
The thermoneutral zone.
right? Think of this as the temperature range where your body feels comfortable. It doesn't need to spend energy shivering to warm up or sweating to cool down.
Makes sense.
And in a premenopausal state, the hormone estrogen acts as a highly effective buffer for this thermostat. It basically keeps that thermoneutral zone really wide and forgiving.
Meaning you can walk from an overly air-conditioned office into a hot summer parking lot, and your body can handle that transition without immediately freaking out.
Exactly. The thermostat has some built-in leniency, but when estrogen levels begin to fluctuate and, eventually drop during perimenopause and menopause, that wide, forgiving buffer it completely disappears. Yeah, the thermoneutral zone narrows dramatically. So the hypothalamus essentially loses its shock absorbers. It develops this incredible hair trigger sensitivity to internal temperature changes.
And the sources show just how extreme that hair trigger is. I mean, a microscopic core body temperature increase of just zero point 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit is enough to cause the menopausal brain to panic.
Right, less than a single degree.
Which is crazy. It registers that tiny fraction of a degree as a critical overheating event and instantly triggers an emergency cooling response, which, means flooding the skin with sweat.
Which is why you might suddenly start sweating bullets without actually perceiving a full wave of heat. But the important thing to remember here is your core temperature is perfectly safe.
Hey, so the body isn't actually overheating dangerously, it just mistakenly thinks it is?
Exactly. The hypothalamus is simply processing faulty signals. And the specific neurobiology behind this, it involves a neuropeptide called neurokinin B, or NKB,
Okay.
and a set of neurons in the brain's temperature control center, known as KNDI neurons. That's spelled KNDY.
Okay, yeah, looking at the data on those KND neurons, it seems their entire behavioral profile changes. Because normally, estrogen and NKB keep each other in check, right?
Precisely. They balance each other out.
The KNDD neurons are stimulated by NKB, and then they're calmed down or inhibited by estrogen. It's this really delicate, balanced feedback loop.
But without estrogen to pump the brakes through the menopausal transition, that NKB signaling goes completely unopposed.
It just runs wild.
It does. It bombards the thermoregulatory center, and this unopposed signaling actually causes the KNDA neurons to become hypertrophic.
Meaning they physically get larger?
Yes, they physically change, they become enlarged and chronically overactive. They're just constantly screaming at the brain that you are too hot.
So it's basically like having a broken smart thermostat in your house. Like the AC blasts at full speed just because someone opened the fridge door for a second.
That is the perfect analogy,
Okay.
yes. And the brain then triggers what the medical articles call heat dissipation effectors. It dilates your blood vessels and just throws the sweat glands into complete overdrive.
Which brings us to the second half of the equation. We know why the volume of sweat increases, but understanding why the smell changes, that requires looking at the changing recipe of the sweat itself.
Right, because not all sweat is created equal.
Yeah, the anatomy sources make a really clear distinction here. We've got two entirely different sweat systems. The eccrine glands, those are our standard issue cooling system.
Right, the ones all over the body.
Exactly, forehead, palms, back. And they produce a watery fluid that is almost entirely water and salt, meant purely for evaporative cooling. And crucially, eccrine sweat is completely odorless.
Completely.
But the apocrine glands, they are a completely different story.
They really are. So epicrine glands are heavily concentrated in areas with hair follicles, specifically the armpits and the groin. And the defining characteristic of these apocrine glands is that they are activated by androgens, which are hormones like testosterone.
Here's where it gets really interesting. While we know women naturally produce testosterone in the ovaries, the key shift during menopause is the ratio.
Right, the balance of power.
Exactly. As estrogen plummets, the body is left with a relatively higher ratio of testosterone compared to that baseline estrogen. That relative shift means these androgen-sensitive apocrine glands are suddenly being activated far more than they used to be.
And apocrine sweat is not a watery cooling fluid. It is a thick, sometimes milky substance that is incredibly rich in triglycerides, lipids, fatty acids, and proteins.
So we aren't just producing more sweat, we are literally changing the ingredients. We're switching from serving a glass of tap water to serving a nutrient-dense protein shake on our skin.
I love that, yes, a protein shake through the skin.
Mhm.
And to compound that shift, the clinical research highlights that apocrine glands are also highly responsive to stress hormones, particularly cortisol and norepinephrine.
Which honestly makes perfect biological sense. I mean, menopause is a high cortisol state for many women. The anxiety of the transition, the physical discomfort, the lack of sleep due to night sweats, all of that drives cortisol levels way up.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And that elevated cortisol acts as a secondary trigger for the apocrine glands. It signals them to pump out even more of this thick, lipid-rich sweat.
So it's a double whammy.
Yeah, you have hormonal ratios and stress responses working in tandem to flood the skin with this very specific fluid.
But here's the paradox, though. The sources note that even this thick, nutrient-dense apocrine sweat is completely odorless when it first leaves the pore.
That's right.
Like the sweat itself doesn't smell like ammonia or onions or that musky scent people describe. The odor is actually a byproduct of the guests at the banquet, the skin's microbiome.
Exactly. The human skin is covered in a diverse microscopic community of bacteria. And when you start producing high volumes of apocrine sweat, those bacteria essentially start feasting.
They're having a field day.
They are. They metabolize the lipids and proteins in the sweat, and as a byproduct of digesting those compounds, they release volatile odor molecules, many of which contain sulfur.
Wow. So the bacteria are digesting the lipid-rich sweat and off-gassing sulfur compounds. But the environment for those bacteria is also changing, right? The research on the acid mantle is just fascinating.
It really is. So normally, estrogen helps maintain a slightly acidic barrier on the skin.
The acid mantle.
Right. And that acidic pH naturally inhibits the overgrowth of odor-causing bacteria, keeps them in check. But when estrogen levels decline, the skin's pH balance shifts. It becomes less acidic.
So the hostile environment that kept the bad bacteria at bay is basically neutralized?
Exactly. This allows the odor-causing bacterial populations to multiply rapidly. So now you have a much larger population of bacteria feeding on a richer, denser food source.
Oh, man. And this pH shift is systemic, too, because the sources detailing genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM, they show the exact same mechanism happening in the vaginal microbiome.
Yes, the exact same thing.
A loss of estrogen leads to a sharp decline in beneficial bacteria called lactobacilli, which are responsible for keeping the vaginal pH acidic.
And when those lactobacilli decline and the pH rises, the environment allows other opportunistic bacteria to thrive, which directly leads to a new, sometimes really distressing odor in the groin area, frequently accompanied by dryness and tissue irritation.
So our skin has lost its acidic defense shield. We're feeding bacteria a richer diet. A&D, our bacterial populations explode. No wonder our old deodorant is waving the white flag.
Right. It doesn't stand a chance. But what's fascinating here is your brain might actually be magnifying the severity of the smell.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, we have to factor in conditions called hyperosmia, which is a heightened hypersensitive sense of smell, and phantasmia, which is the perception of phantom odors.
Oh, wow. I mean, looking at the cellular level in the research, there are actually estrogen and progesterone receptors located right inside the olfactory epithelium, right?
Yes.
The actual tissue in your nasal cavity responsible for detecting scents has hormone receptors.
Isn't that wild? So when those hormone levels fluctuate and drop, it radically alters your olfactory function. While some women do experience a decline in their ability to smell, many suddenly develop an extreme sensitivity.
Says you might become hypersensitive to a subtle body odor that was actually always present.
Exactly. Or you might perceive a really strong smell that literally no one else in the room can detect.
So you think you reek, but it's partly your newly upgraded, overly sensitive nose analyzing every single molecule.
Yeah, your brain is playing tricks on you.
That is so wild. Although we also need to draw a hard line here based on the literature between menopause body odor and what is clinically called the aging scent, because it's really easy to conflate the two, but they have completely different chemical origins.
Very different. The aging scent is driven by a specific compound called 2-nonmolecular It's frequently described as having this grassy, greasy, or woody smell. And this happens because as human beings age chronologically, not hormonally, but chronologically, our skin produces higher amounts of omega-7 fatty acids. And when those fatty acids interact with oxygen, a process called oxidation, they create that 2-non-anisole scent.
Got it. So that is a function of oxidative stress over time, which is completely separate from the specific hormonal drop in the apocrine gland activation of menopause.
Precisely. Menopause odor is an active microbiome shift,
All right.
whereas 2-non-anisole is just an oxidative aging process.
Okay, so having completely unpacked the biological mechanics of all this, I want to make sure we don't leave you feeling overwhelmed by all this information, because knowing the mechanisms means we actually have real solutions.
Right, because we understand the exact mechanisms of the menopausal shift. The receptor issue in the brain and the bacterial issue on the skin. The medical and lifestyle solutions become highly targeted.
Yeah, a stronger bar of soap is never going to work because it doesn't address the root causality at all. So let's transition into the solutions, starting with the most direct intervention outlined in the NICE guidelines, hormone replacement therapy, or HRT.
Yes, the big one.
Because the whole cascade starts with missing estrogen at the hypothalamus. HRT replaces it, effectively stabilizing the thermoregulatory center.
Right. By restoring the estrogen buffer, HRT stops those faulty overheating signals from ever firing in the first place.
Yep.
And the clinical data shows that systemic HRT reduces vasomotor symptoms, the hot flushes and the spontaneous sweating, by a staggering 75%.
75%, that is huge. There is a really curious caveat in the sources about starting HRT, though. It mentions a temporary scent transition.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you first reintroduce hormones, the body has to recalibrate, right? And that sudden influx can temporarily reactivate those apocrine glands pretty aggressively, causing a brief spike in sweating and odor before the system finally settles into its new baseline.
It's a really crucial expectation to manage. The body is just readjusting its thermostat, but once the hormone levels stabilize, that apocrine hyperactivation subsides.
Good to know. But for listeners who have medical contraindications for HRT or simply choose not to use hormones, the recent NICE guidelines highlight a major non-hormonal breakthrough called fezolinetant.
Sold under the brand name Veoza. Yes, fezolinetant is honestly a marvel of precision medicine.
Yeah.
Remember how we discussed the neuropeptide NKB running wild, overstimulating the candidiaid neurons because the estrogen brakes are gone?
Right, the broken thermostat.
Well, fezolinetant is an antagonist that specifically binds to and blocks that exact NKB receptor in the brain.
Okay, but I have to push back on the mechanics of that, though. If Veoza completely blocks the NKB receptor to stop the hot flush signal, doesn't that effectively tame off the body's ability to cool itself down when it's genuinely overheating? Like if you're out on a 100-degree day, you still need to sweat?
That is such a vital distinction to make. But no, the clinical data shows that fezolinetant only intercepts the hyperactive menopausal signaling path.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it blocks the exaggerated NKB response, but it does not shut down your basal thermoregulation. Your body's foundational ability to sense external heat and cool itself via the normal eccrine sweat system remains completely intact.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's essentially filtering out the static without turning off the radio.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. And moving from systemic treatments to local ones, the literature on genitourinary syndrome of menopause points to local vaginal estrogen as the gold standard for treating odor and irritation in the groin area.
Yes, local estrogen is incredibly effective because it acts like targeted skincare.
Skincare for down there.
Exactly. It's applied directly to the vaginal
Yeah.
tissue so it doesn't circulate through your bloodstream in large amounts, like systemic HRT does. It specifically restores the acidic pH of that tissue, which brings back the beneficial lactobacilli bacteria. And by fixing the root cause of the microbiome imbalance, the odor and the dryness are eliminated.
That's fantastic. Now, beyond medications, the sources also detail lifestyle interventions that physically alter the environment on the skin. And the impact of clothing choices, specifically regarding synthetic fibers like polyester, is massive
It really is. Polyester is uniquely problematic for menopausal sweat.
because it traps the heat.
Well, more than that, synthetic fibers are oleophilic, meaning they attract and hold on to oils and lipids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when your apocrine glands pump out that lipid-rich sweat, polyester traps those specific molecules, along with the heat and moisture, creating an incredibly hospitable incubator for odor-causing bacteria.
Yikes. So ditching the polyester is key. Switching to breathable, natural fibers like cotton, bamboo, or silk physically changes the environment because natural fibers allow moisture to evaporate and they don't bind to the lipids in the same way, fundamentally reducing the bacterial colonization happening on the fabric against your skin.
Exactly. And the clinical data also attaches hard numbers to dietary changes. Adopting a Mediterranean-style diet, prioritizing vegetables, legumes, olive oil, and whole grains, while severely limiting heavy sugars, alcohol, and caffeine, can objectively reduce vasomotor symptoms by about 20%.
20% just from diet. And the mechanism behind that reduction ties right back to the stress response we talked about earlier.
Yep.
Because cutting refined sugars prevents severe blood glucose spikes. Preventing blood glucose spikes prevents the subsequent spikes in cortisol. And by keeping cortisol stable, you avoid sending that secondary stress trigger to the apocrine sweat glands.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, every intervention, whether it's blocking a brain receptor with fezolinetant or avoiding a cortisol spike through diet, is about dismantling the biological chain reaction that leads to the odor.
So, what does this all mean? It means you have a massive toolkit. The body might be changing the rules of the game, but medical science and lifestyle medicine give you the tools to play and win. Let's recap the biological journey we've mapped out today, just to bring it all together.
Sounds good.
It all starts in the brain with a hypothalamus that loses its estrogen buffer, drastically narrowing its thermoneutral zone until it panics over a fraction of a degree.
And that panic triggers an emergency cooling response, which leads to the sudden overactivation of androgen-sensitive apocrine sweat glands,
Right.
which then switches your sweat from watery and odorless to a thick, nutrient-dense fluid.
And that fluid becomes an absolute banquet for the bacteria on your skin. Their population explodes because your protective acidic skin barrier has neutralized. And of course, to top it all off, shifting estrogen levels in your olfactory epithelium mean your nose might be hypersensitive to the whole process anyway.
It is a profound, incredibly complex biological shift.
Yeah.
But it is entirely natural, and as the clinical sources prove, highly treatable from multiple angles.
Oh, it really is. Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that frames this entire process in a completely different light.
Yeah. We've talked about all of this as a chain reaction of symptoms to manage. But what if, instead of viewing these sudden sweats and new odors as a nuisance, or feeling shame as if it's some sort of hygiene failure, what if we viewed them as a highly sophisticated communication system?
A communication system, I like that. Your brain isn't attacking you, it is fiercely trying to protect you. Based on the new fluctuating hormonal data it's receiving, your internal thermostat genuinely believes you are in danger of overheating.
Right.
It is deploying its most powerful, aggressive cooling mechanisms to keep you safe. It's not your body betraying you. It's your body working overtime, doing exactly what it evolved to do, trying to maintain your safety in a rapidly changing internal environment.
And when you reframe it as protection rather than betrayal, the frustration starts to look a lot more like awe at how hard your body is working for you.
Absolutely. So the next time your deodorant throws in the towel by noon, remember that's not a failure. That is just your body working overtime to protect you in a changing world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep taking care of yourselves.